Okay, what we're going to do now is take a look at moving our code from what mostly is held in our app component, and we're going to move this over to our centralized store now. So what we're going to do is take a look at what we're doing here. Well, we're loading a list of our activities currently, and we're storing this in local state. And we're going to start by moving this outside of our app component into our activity store. So what we'll do is we'll just grab the function, or let's go back to our activity store first, and we'll remove this temporary code, and we don't need the title here anymore either. And what we'll do is just create the properties we need, and we're going to have a list of our activities that we're going to store in our activities store. So we're going to have activities, which is going to be a type of activity array, and we'll initialize this to an empty array first of all. We're also going to have a property for our selected activity, and this is going to be of type activity, and we're going to set this equal to null initially, but of course due to our TypeScript it's going to complain if we try and do that, so we need to give this a union type and say that the activity can be an activity or it can be null. We'll also add a property for edit mode and set this equal to false. We'll have a loading property and set this equal to false, and we'll have a loading initial property also that we're going to set to false. And then what we'll do is we're going to create an action called load activities, and this is going to be an arrow function, just so that we don't need to worry about binding this function to a class as we discussed in the previous lesson. And inside our load activities we're going to set this.loading initial equal to true. And this is going to update this, and we're going to observe this from our component. Now what we want to do is go and take our code from inside the app component, but we were using promises inside here, and the agent is going to return us a promise. And if we're using promises, then we can certainly use async await. And that's what we're going to do inside our methods inside the store. We can use promises, that's going to work fine. We don't have to use async await. This is a personal developer preference that I'm using here. I just prefer the syntax that we get with this. And as I mentioned before, this is just syntactic sugar over promises. So in order to use async await in an arrow function, we add the async operator here, and then we've got our non-asynchronous code. Anything that's going to be synchronous we'll just do outside of a try-catch block, and then any synchronous code is going to be contained inside a try-catch block. And we'll just console.log any errors, as we don't have any error handling system in place just now. So what we can do then is we can go and take a look at what we were doing inside our app component, and we were getting a list of our activities, and then for each activity we were splitting the date and then pushing the activity into that activities array. So what we'll do then is we'll take this code and we'll populate it inside our store. So what we'll do, we'll say const activities equals await, and then we can say agent activities and list. And this list operation is going to return to us the list of activities, and we're going to wait for them. So we're not going to execute the next line of code until we have something inside our activities layer. And then what we can do is effectively, let's just go back to our app component, and we're going to use the same code in here. So I'm just going to copy this response for each into my clipboard and just paste this in, and swap response for activities. And what we'll do is we'll populate the observable directly. Now this is going to seem odd if you come from Redux, because what we're doing here, if we're pushing something into this array, this activities array we're initializing to an empty array initially, and then we're getting our activities from our API. Then we're looping over the activities here, and then we're mutating our state in MobX. Now this is perfectly fine in MobX. Now if we were using Redux, then this would be an anti-pattern. This is what we're doing here is we're mutating state. We have an array of activities initialized to an empty array, and then we're directly pushing an activity into this array. Now, Redux is an immutable state management system, but MobX is not that kind of library. MobX creates mutable objects that we can and should mutate directly. It does not use immutable structures. So we can mutate our states inside our method here, and that's what we're going to be doing. And after this action, and we have our activities populated, we can then say list.loadingInitial equals false. And we'll also take this line and we'll copy it in our catch block as well. Now that we have this particular method in place, what we can do is go back to our app component, and inside our use effect, let's remove all of the code we have inside here. And what we can specify now is we can say activity store and then call a load activities method. But what we'll also need to do is pass in the activity store as a dependency to our use effect here as well. And then what we can do is update our loading indicator to check to see if we are using the activity store.loadingInitial. For we're going to get our activities from the store now. We'll remove the temporary code for the H2 and the button that we were using earlier. And for the activities that we're passing down to our dashboard, we're going to say activity store and dot activities so that we get our activities from the store now rather than inside our local state. And we'll probably have a few things to remove. Let's just remove the button and try and clean things up as we go along inside this component. And we're no longer using our loading state inside here, so we can remove that as well and see if we've got any errors to clean up. No, we haven't. So what we should be able to do is go across to our app, refresh the page, and we can see that we're still getting our activities, and we see the loading indicator as well. Now there's a bit of a flicker there. That's no good, but don't worry about that for the moment. I promise you any flickering will be fixed by the time we get to the end of this section. So let's take a look at the console to see what's going on, because I suspect we're going to have some warnings. And indeed we do, and it tells us that since strict mode is enabled, changing observed values without using an action is not allowed. And it tells us it tried to modify the loading initial here. And if we refresh, yep, same thing. And what we'll do is we'll take a look at why this is happening and what we need to do to get around this next.